persuade 600 people from Illinois that Abe Lincoln was a tyrant and an enemy of freedom. Real challenge. Well, I'll get to it on time. I have a number of facts here I'm going to bring out, and I'll report them, and you can decide. One of the first things Lincoln did when he was, after he was elected, before he was inaugurated, was to instruct William Stewart to go and get a constitutional amendment through the Senate that would forbid the federal government from ever interfering with slavery in the South, and Stewart did. It was called the Corwin Amendment. You can look it up on the internet, of course, named after a congressman named Corwin. And Lincoln also instructed Stewart to go and get a federal law passed that would nullify the personal liberty laws that existed in some of the New England states. These were laws where the New England states said, we refuse to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act. And so Lincoln did everything he could to get a constitutional amendment passed that would have forbidden the government from ever interfering with slavery, and it was passed by the House and the Senate and several states. And in Lincoln's first inaugural address, he supported it explicitly in his first inaugural address. And so 4 years later, in February of 1865, there was a peace conference between Alexander Stephens, the Vice President of the Confederate government, and his entourage, and Lincoln and Seward and a few others. They met at Hampton Roads, Virginia, and they talked about ending the war, of course. And what Lincoln told them, Lincoln and Seward were together, what they told them was the Emancipation Proclamation was a war measure, and therefore when the war is over, it will no longer be in effect in any way. And they also told them that the 13th Amendment that was making its way through Congress at the time to abolish slavery could easily be defeated if the South would just rejoin the Union, because there were 36 states at the time, and Seward instructed Stephens that they only needed 10 states to defeat the 13th Amendment. And the reason I started with this is that it dispels one of the bigger myths about Lincoln. The myth, William Seward, the Secretary of State, who I'm referring to. The reason I brought this up at the beginning is that it dispels the myth that Lincoln didn't do anything about slavery at the beginning of his administration because he didn't have the political clout to do it. He maintained the same position for his entire last 4 years of his life, and the position was, we won't touch stubborn slavery. I'm only interested in opposing the extension of slavery into the territories. Stay in the Union and you can keep your slaves was his position. And by the way, in terms of saving the Union, I argue in my books that Lincoln actually destroyed the Union because the Union was a voluntary union. All you have to do is read the Constitution to know that it was the states that ratified the Constitution. They were sovereign. That's why they had to ratify the Constitution. And so the Union, of course, was no longer voluntary after 1865. I think of it, the parallel I think of is a woman who leaves her husband because he's been abusing her. He drags her back into the home, chains her to the bedpost, and threatens to shoot her if she leaves again. The Union has been preserved. They're back together again. To me, that is the sense in which the Union was preserved at the cost of 620,000 lives. For several generations, historians have referred to the Lincoln dictatorship. One example is the historian Clinton Rossiter, who was the editor of the Federalist Papers in the 1950s and 60s. He was a Cornell history professor. And he said this: dictatorship played a decisive role in the North's successful effort to maintain the Union by force of arms. Lincoln's amazing disregard for the Constitution was considered by nobody as legal, end quote. So it doesn't sound like he was a friend of freedom. If you look at statements like this by distinguished scholars.